Steelers Nation. The conversation around the Pittsburgh Steelers defense has changed, and it has changed for real. Those who have been watching closely felt it come into focus over the last 3 games. Early in the season, this unit was put against the wall. The numbers weren't helping, especially against the pass, and the noise only got louder when expectations were pushed sky high. There was talk of historic potential, and when that didn't immediately show up on the stat sheet, frustration followed. But what defines the Steelers has never been the starting point. It's the response. And that response has a very familiar address in Pittsburgh, the defensive front imposing its will, controlling the tempo, changing the game with contact, pressure, and attitude. It's old-school football. It's identity. It's the kind of defense that reignites the crowd and makes opponents think twice before the snap. If you are black and gold with pride, smash that like button to strengthen this nation that never stops, and drop a "here we go" in the comments. What stands out most when you break down this stretch is how much better everything looks when the front is intact and fundamentally sound. When Derek Harmon is healthy and on the field, the entire structure of the defense stabilizes. His presence changes how blocks are absorbed, how linebackers flow, and how confident everyone feels doing their job. You can see it in the pad level, in the hand usage, and in how consistently he wins his gap. He plays with a style that feels very familiar in Pittsburgh, technically clean, physical, and disciplined, but with an athletic profile that allows him to effect plays quickly. When he's doing his job, the linebackers aren't guessing, and the edges aren't cheating inside trying to make up for breakdowns. That's when this defense starts to look connected. The biggest difference lately hasn't been some dramatic schematic overhaul. It's been the return to basics. Gap discipline up front, linebackers trusting what they see instead of chasing ghosts, edge defenders playing the run with the same urgency they bring to rushing the passer. When the edges are firm, when the interior holds, offenses are forced to fight for yards in tight spaces instead of exploiting wide lanes. That's a huge reason why the run defense has climbed back toward the middle of the league after sitting in a rough spot earlier in the year. And when you consider the quality of running games they've faced recently, that improvement carries real weight. This stretch hasn't been built against weak competition. Detroit does not come into games unable to run the ball. Miami, with Devon Chain, is not a team you shut down by accident. Baltimore, when they commit to Derrick Henry, is as physical as it gets. What matters is that against these types of opponents, the Steelers' front didn't flinch. They stayed sound, played with pride, and forced offenses to earn everything. That pride factor is real. When performances like the Buffalo game happen, and the numbers become part of the league-wide conversation, players hear it. If you have pride, you respond. And this group responded the way Mike Tomlin coached defenses tend to respond. Another key layer to this turnaround is the emergence of young players up front. When teams tried to run away from Cam Hayward earlier in the season, the cracks showed because the support wasn't consistent. Lanes opened not because Hayward failed, but because gaps next to him weren't held. That has changed. Young defensive linemen have stepped into bigger roles and handled them. Jack Sawyer, making his first NFL start, played like someone who belongs. He's not a player who avoids contact or responsibility. He runs to it. He showed it with early tackles for loss, and he's already shown versatility this season with a sack and an interception before this game even happened. That kind of confidence, paired with discipline, is exactly what this defense needs. The broader picture is that the Steelers have quietly built depth and youth along the defensive front out of necessity. Injuries forced opportunities, and opportunities revealed readiness. Keanu Benton, Derek Harmon, Jack Sawyer, and Yahya Black are all being asked to contribute, and they are learning on the field. That's not always clean, but it's essential. There's real value in seeing young players contribute early rather than waiting half a season to trust them. It mirrors past rebuilds on this defense, where early exposure eventually led to a stronger, more complete unit. And through all of it, Cam Hayward remains the anchor. Even as pure athleticism naturally fades, his technique, consistency, and attention to detail continue to define what playing defensive line in Pittsburgh is supposed to look like. He's not just producing, he's teaching by example. The way he wins now is with leverage, timing, and precision, the same evolution you saw from past greats who adapted as their careers progressed. Having that presence while young linemen are learning is not a small thing. It accelerates growth in ways that don't always show up immediately on a stat sheet. All of this points to a defense that is starting to look like it understands itself again. Not chasing splash plays at the expense of structure. Not panicking when offenses test them. Just doing the work, rep after rep, and trusting that discipline will win out. This 3-game stretch isn't about perfection. It's about direction. The trajectory is up, and it's being driven from the trenches outward. So when you watch this defense now, the question isn't just whether the improvement is real, but whether this front can keep setting the tone as the season tightens and the margin for error disappears. Do you believe this defensive turnaround is sustainable as the competition stays physical and the stakes keep rising? That sustainability question is where everything starts to get interesting, because the defensive improvement doesn't exist in a vacuum. When the front seven begins to control games, it changes the personality of the entire team, and you can feel how that confidence bleeds into other phases. The Steelers aren't asking their defense to be perfect. They're asking it to be reliable, physical, and mentally sharp when games tighten, and that standard has been much closer to reality over this recent stretch. What makes this moment different from earlier in the season is how collective the effort has become. It's not one player masking flaws. It's not Cam Hayward having to erase mistakes by himself. It's the group playing together, understanding that if everyone does their job, no one has to play hero ball. That's when the Steelers' defense is at its best. You saw it when linebackers flowed freely instead of hesitating. You saw it when edge players committed to setting hard edges instead of abandoning run fits in search of sacks. And you saw it in how offenses were forced into longer, more physical drives instead of explosive chunk plays. There's also a mental toughness component here that matters late in the season. This defense absorbed criticism earlier in the year, some of it deserved, some of it amplified by expectations. But instead of fracturing, it recalibrated. That kind of response doesn't happen unless the locker room believes in the standard being preached. Mike Tomlin wasn't going to let pride disappear, and the players weren't going to accept being defined by one bad stretch. When you hear how they talk about fundamentals now, about pad level, gap control, and trust, it tells you they're locked back into the process. That process has also been accelerated by meaningful snaps for young players. These aren't cameo appearances. These are real reps in games that matter. Jack Sawyer isn't just filling space, he's contributing. Derek Harmon isn't just rotating. When healthy, he's impacting the structure of the defense. Keanu Benton is being pushed, and competition is forcing consistency. That internal pressure matters. It raises the floor of the unit because no one can afford to coast. Every snap is earned, and that mindset is contagious. Cam Hayward's role in all of this can't be overstated. He's not just producing at a high level, he's serving as the blueprint. Younger players can see how longevity at this level is built through technique, preparation, and attention to detail. They're learning that dominance doesn't always come from raw power or speed, but from understanding leverage, timing, and responsibility. That kind of education is invaluable, especially for a team that's clearly investing in its defensive future up front. The encouraging part is that none of this feels fluky. The improvements aren't built on trickery or favorable bounces. They're built on repeatable habits. Staying gap sound, winning one-on-ones in tight spaces, trusting help instead of overextending. When you face teams that want to test you physically, those habits are what keep you competitive deep into games. And when the Steelers have been at their best historically, that's exactly how they've played. There's still work to be done. The defense isn't suddenly elite across every category, and nobody inside that building would pretend otherwise. But the direction is clear. The front is more disciplined. The young players are growing in real time. The veterans are anchoring the standard. And most importantly, the group is responding when challenged, not shrinking from it. As the season continues and the pressure increases, this defensive identity will be tested again. Opponents will try to exploit weaknesses, force breakdowns, and see if this improvement holds. But what you're seeing right now is a defense that's rediscovering what it means to play Steelers football, one snap at a time, starting up front and working outward. What also deserves attention is how this defensive growth aligns with the timing of the season. This is not September football anymore, where mistakes can be explained away as growing pains. This is the point of the year where teams either harden into who they are or get exposed. The Steelers' defense, especially up front, is choosing the first path. You can see it in how quickly they adjust during games, how fewer mental errors show up on early downs, and how offenses are being forced into uncomfortable third down situations instead of living ahead of the chains. That third down impact starts with first and second down dominance, and that's where the defensive line has quietly reclaimed control. When the front wins early, everything behind it becomes simpler. Linebackers can play downhill instead of laterally. Safeties don't have to cheat into the box as often. Corners can sit on routes instead of worrying about extended play-action windows. It all ties together, and that's the part that doesn't always jump out on highlight reels but wins games in December. Another layer here is conditioning and durability. Playing fundamentally sound football up front isn't just about technique, it's about stamina. When linemen aren't overextending or playing out of position, they conserve energy. That matters late in games, especially against teams that want to wear you down. Over the last few weeks, You've seen the Steelers front still holding its ground in the fourth quarter, still getting off blocks, still forcing tough yards instead of surrendering them. That's a sign of a group that's not just surviving, but managing games. There's also a psychological edge that comes with this style of play. Offensive coordinators hate facing fronts that don't bust assignments. It limits creativity. It forces patience. And patience is often where mistakes happen. When runs that should go for 6 yards only go for 2, when cutback lanes disappear, frustration sets in. That's when penalties happen, when timing gets rushed, when quarterbacks feel pressure even without a sack. The Steelers' defense is starting to reintroduce that discomfort. This is where the youth movement and veteran leadership truly intersect. Young players bring energy, speed, and hunger. Veterans bring calm, perspective, and discipline. When those elements are balanced, you get consistency instead of volatility. The Steelers are clearly moving toward that balance up front. It doesn't mean every snap will be perfect, but it means the floor is rising. And a rising floor is what keeps teams competitive when games get tight and margins shrink. If you zoom out, what's happening now feels like the foundation being reinforced rather than rebuilt. The identity hasn't changed. It's been reminded. Physicality, accountability, collective effort. That's what this defense is leaning back into. And while there will be tougher tests ahead, the way they're responding right now suggests they're prepared to handle them without losing themselves. The real question moving forward isn't whether this defense can flash again, but whether it can keep stacking disciplined performances without slipping back into bad habits. That answer will define how far this team can go, because everything in Pittsburgh still starts in the trenches. There's another important angle that ties everything together, and it's how this defensive steadiness has allowed the Steelers to control the emotional flow of games. When the front holds its ground early, you don't see panic on the sideline after one bad series. You don't see rushed adjustments or overcorrections. Instead, you see a defense that understands it has time to impose itself. That confidence is subtle, but it's powerful, and it only exists when players trust the structure in front of them. What's happening up front is also reducing the margin of error elsewhere. When the defensive line consistently eats blocks and closes interior gaps, linebackers are free to be decisive instead of reactive. That decisiveness shows up in cleaner fits, better tackling angles, and fewer explosive runs leaking through the second level. It also means defensive backs aren't forced into constant emergency support, which lowers the risk of busted coverages. This is how a defense quietly becomes harder to score on, even if the yardage totals don't always look dominant. The Steelers have also benefited from something that doesn't get enough attention: repetition under pressure. These young defenders aren't learning in meaningless moments. They're learning in games where the opponent has something to lose. That accelerates development in a way practice never can. Mistakes are corrected immediately. Good reps are reinforced instantly. Over time, those experiences compound, and you start seeing players play faster because the picture becomes clearer. That's exactly what's beginning to show with this group. Cam Hayward's presence in these moments continues to matter, not just because of what he does physically, but because of how he anchors emotional control. When things tighten late in games, he doesn't rush. He doesn't freelance. He plays his technique and expects everyone else to do the same. That steadiness filters through the entire front. Younger players see that poise and mirror it. That's how culture sustains itself across seasons. There's also a strategic benefit emerging. Opponents now have to prepare for a Steelers defensive front that isn't giving away easy answers. Earlier in the year, there were tendencies offenses could target. Now, those tendencies are harder to exploit because discipline has returned. That forces offenses to execute at a higher level for longer stretches, and very few teams can do that without eventually making a mistake. The Steelers don't need to dominate every snap. They need to outlast, and this front is putting them in position to do exactly that. As the schedule continues to tighten, the importance of this defensive identity will only grow. Games become more physical, play calling becomes more conservative, field position matters more. In those environments, teams that can control the line of scrimmage survive. Teams that can't, don't. The Steelers are clearly leaning into that reality instead of fighting it. This isn't about chasing headlines or proving something to the outside world. It's about building something dependable. Right now, the Steelers' defensive front is becoming dependable again, and that's the most encouraging sign of all. If they can continue stacking performances built on discipline, effort, and trust, this defense will remain a problem for anyone lined up across from it. Another element that keeps surfacing when you study this stretch closely is how patient the Steelers' defense has become. Earlier in the season, there was a sense that plays had to be made immediately, that someone had to shoot a gap, guess right, or force a moment. That urgency often works against a defense. Now, what you're seeing is patience paired with confidence. Linemen are engaging, locking out, reading, and shedding instead of gambling. Linebackers are trusting that the picture will declare itself. That patience is what allows the defense to play fast without playing reckless. This matters even more when you consider how offenses are built today. So many schemes rely on defenders overreacting. They want eyes in the wrong place. They want hesitation followed by panic. Where front stays square, low, and disciplined, those designs lose their edge. Suddenly, runs are bottled up where they're supposed to be. Play action doesn't stretch the defense as easily. Everything slows down for the offense and speeds up for the defense. That's the balance the Steelers are starting to reestablish. What's encouraging is that this isn't just happening on obvious run downs. You're seeing it on early downs, neutral situations, and even when offenses try to catch the defense in lighter personnel groupings. The Steelers' front isn't flinching. They're holding their ground, forcing offenses to prove they can execute cleanly over and over again. And when games come down to execution, that's where discipline wins. There's also a growing sense of accountability within the unit. When mistakes happen now, they don't spiral. They get corrected. You can see players communicating between snaps, adjusting alignments, making sure everyone is on the same page. That kind of communication doesn't happen unless the group is invested in each other. It tells you the chemistry up front is strengthening, and that's not something you can fake or rush. This stretch is also reinforcing an identity that Pittsburgh fans know well. The Steelers don't need to be flashy defensively to be effective. They need to be physical, smart, and relentless. When those traits show up consistently, everything else tends to follow. Turnovers come. Stops come. Momentum swings. And most importantly, belief builds, both on the field and in the stands. As the season continues, there will be moments where this defense is challenged again. There will be drives where things don't go their way. That's inevitable. The difference now is that the foundation feels sturdier. The front knows who it is. The young players are growing into responsibility instead of shrinking from it. The veterans are setting the tone without having to carry everything alone. That balance is what gives this group a chance to hold up under pressure. At the heart of all of this is one simple truth. When the Steelers are strong in the trenches, they are hard to beat. That has always been part of the franchise's DNA. Right now, you're seeing that DNA reassert itself, not through words or promises, but through snap-by-snap execution.